Welcome to the Microsoft Security Insights Podcast with your hosts, Franklin Grimberg and Edward Walton, where we discuss Microsoft 365 security and Azure security news and products. Recorded March 10th, 2021. Good evening, Nathan.
Good evening, Edward. How's it going?
It goes away. So, to our listeners and supporters, I'd like to introduce you to a friend of the show, the abominable Nathan Swift. Nathan has been a guest on the show, one of the sharpest guys I've met. Security was part of him. He finally found his calling. He's been doing it, but now he gets to do it in title. And we welcome his knowledge and insight whenever we can get him on. I know he's super busy. And so the way we do our podcast, for those who have been part of the show, you know that we sort of talk a little bit of this, a little bit of that. We stay loose. We hope that all our listeners get value from what we're doing. And we welcome any comments. We generally get stuff wrong. Rod Trent. But we really enjoy, and I like giving Rob mess, right? Because he's one of the few people who has a sense of humor like me. He can take it and he can give it, right? Nathan, what you do this week, man? It's Wednesday. What's going on?
Well, earlier the weekend before the week, I was able to get out and go hiking. The weather was finally in the 50s up here near the Carolinas, and over in Kings Mountain, was able to hike around and just see one of the battles that occurred during the Revolutionary War with my 6-year-old son and my dad. So it was pretty awesome to get to do.
Right. The weather's good now up there in North Carolina. It's good.
Yep. Yeah. Pollen's starting to kick in, so my allergies have started to kick in as well.
Yes. So for those who know, Nathan's in North Carolina. I'm in Georgia. We're not too far from each other, and the pollen's coming here too. So I say that the pollen in Georgia is the national, the natural defense against outsiders trying to come and relocate to Georgia. If they can't make you 2 seasons, you won't last here. The pollen, you can see it. It's just snow, right? Any interesting projects you do this week?
No, not really interesting. Just starting to kind of build some stuff, looking at Gray Noise, third-party provider for security and IP enrichment.
Mm-hmm.
Hoping to get that plugged into Sentinel here in the next week or two and get a playbook out of that you could execute. And then just various other stuff. I think one of the announcements about Azure Security Center integrating with Azure Firewall, which has been kind of interesting because the last couple of weeks I've been working a lot with like Azure Firewall Premium since they announced that a couple of weeks ago.
Mm-hmm.
And all the fun stuff that comes with that stuff.
I've done it with Firewall. I've done it with WAF. Be careful. The pricing, right?
Yes.
I don't know.
Now, for folks that might not know on the call, you can actually, if you're using Azure Firewall and you're trying to do some lab work, you can actually deallocate the Azure Firewall in PowerShell.
Mm-hmm.
And so I wrote a PowerShell script a while back that you could run as like a run book, right? That runs daily and then runs at like 5 p.m. And if you forgot to turn it off, we'll then turn it off for you. And then I'm working on an update to that so that it will actually remove the UDRs and the route tables out so that, the lab still works. It's just not sending all the traffic through a deallocated firewall now.
Yeah, I blew myself out of the water where Azure Active Directory Domain Services, ADDS, and did not know the building parameters, man, and it pegged my account, right? Because you pay for a certain amount of objects, whether you use them or not, right? And so, but pretty cool. So, interesting project I'm working on. Got a customer, and I think I pinged you about it.
Yeah.
Customer wants to use Azure Sentinel, and they want the long-term. First, they wanted the log source or the log repository to be Snowflake. Like, doesn't work that way, sir. Excuse me.
Yeah.
Then they clarified and said they want long-term retention in Snowflake. So I'm learning a lot about Snowflake now, right? Yeah. I know we got Event Hub and we got some egress and ingress technologies, procedures, and solutions that we can do. I think we finally figured it out where we'll throw everything in the log analytics. They don't really need more than a year's worth of retention, and then we can put long-term retention. I'll write something. We'll go to Event Hub and we'll dump it in Snowflake, but bringing it out, I'm like, we pre-chew the food and we maintain the fidelity and the context of the security alert to originally get in. I don't know what that looks like coming out. I mean, we can get it out, but do we put Logstash in front of it? Do we got to write some complex, external operators? If I get stuck, I'm going to call Matthew Lowe. Oh, he's on the call. Never mind. So that's all I had, man. And I'm finishing up a huge Defender for Identity POC that lasted about 2 weeks, and now they're going full on production. So they're getting this stuff out, man. This is probably, I cover the product, but I don't do it every day, right? But here's a tip to all of our listeners. If you ever got a problem with the sensors in Microsoft Defender for Identity, it used to be called Azure Active Directory Advanced Threat Protection, or Azure Advanced Threat Protection. And before that, when I first got introduced to it, it was called Advanced Threat Analytics. It's the proxy. It's always the proxy, all day long, man. And if the team you're working with doesn't control the proxy, you got to go convince the network guys it's the proxy, and able to fight it. And I get out of the way, and they come back like, oh yeah, it was a proxy. We're breaking down the SSL traffic and so on. I'm like, yes, we're telling you this. Well, we didn't see the error message that was in their docs. Don't matter, right? So that's the only interesting things. Lots of news and notes, but we generally don't go into those. We'll put them in the show notes when we have a guest on. So with that being said, I'd like to introduce our guest, Mr. Matthew Lowe. Matthew Lowe, I can't do justice. He sent me a biography with a huge picture, man, the biggest picture I've ever seen inside of an email, right? It just killed the resolution on my screen. I tried to shrink it, and he was like, I will not be diminished, right? I tried to do it. Matthew Lowe is a PG, a product group manager at Microsoft. Anytime I say something incorrect or project, Matthew, let me know. He focuses on numerous technologies, but his primary is around Azure Sentinel and all things security on the Microsoft stack. He touches it, even though he may not own it. I've learned so much from this guy afar. Like I'll tell everybody, I have a KQL crush on Matthew, Nathan, Rod, Matt Egan, right? And I learned so much from these guys. So with that being said, I'd like to go ahead and introduce to our listeners and supporters to Mr. Matthew Lowe. So Matthew, tell us about yourself, a brief introduction. What's your passion? And what are you breaking at Microsoft right now?
No, quite the intro. That large picture, that was my resume right there. It's just a picture of my face. No, I sent that on mobile, and so that's why it wasn't properly formatted. But as Ed said, I am currently what is called a program manager here at Microsoft. So when we talk about program management, that's basically a combination of project management with product management. So if you want to really get it messy, that's what my role is. But like he had said, I'm primarily focused on Azure Sentinel. And if you are quite familiar with Azure Sentinel, I mean, it dips its toes into every pool and security that you can think of. So we have to know, a little bit of everything. But background about myself, currently located in Boston, Massachusetts. I used to be a support engineer here at Microsoft for the different Azure security products. So I used to actually be located in Dallas, Texas. Definitely glad I wasn't there within the last couple of months. So, but yeah, I've been with Microsoft going on 4 years now. I was a college hire straight out of college. And so that's kind of how I got my start here. And so I've been with the CXE team, the customer experience engineering team, for about a year now, officially a year last week. So no longer the new kid.
Dude, I have no idea. I really didn't go look. I figured with the depth of knowledge and the expertise that you've been exhibiting across, the customers I've had. I've only been a GBB for a little over a year, right? I came from the partner side, right? I thought you've been Microsoft like 10, 12 years.
No,
I did not know that.
Well, I mean, that's the whole shtick I got going on is I don't normally show my face. I got to keep my presence anonymous, secure my identity so that when people come to me, they think, I'm some guy nearing a retirement, when in reality, I've only been in the industry for a handful of years.
Really?
So
you were a college hire, and Nathan, you have any questions? I know you guys operate and work together, right? We've all done time together.
I was chatting with Nathan earlier, so.
Really?
Yeah.
I like to say, how do you know Nathan? We've done time together. So, what college? Did you come out of cybersecurity curriculum and dumped you into this IT? How did you do this?
Yeah, so my whole background, I went to the University of Minnesota, which is located in Minneapolis. Um, and when I originally started my degree, I was actually looking at computer science. I come from a background of like a very technology focused family. My dad, who might be watching, is a senior systems engineer in Chicago. My aunt, who is also probably watching, she was a chief technology officer for another law firm in Chicago. So growing up, I was always surrounded by technology, especially Windows and Microsoft. So I was like, oh yeah, I want to get into infrastructure. I'll do computer science. I bombed my second ever computer science program class, and I was like, yeah, we're done. So I switched to IT, and so I focused on networking because I thought, the whole ability to communicate over a network globally through just flashing lights or ones and zeros was amazing. And then I also was like, oh, cybersecurity, that's always super interesting. It's always relevant. So yeah, so I went through a security program at the University of Minnesota. I'm not going to say it was great, but it definitely helped me get my foot in the door. But unfortunately, ironically, when I started at Microsoft, they put me on Dynamics 365 AX. Yeah. So I through the entire interview process, they're like, "What is your passion? What do you want to do?" And I was like, cybersecurity technology, get me in the cloud, you name it. They thought, wow, that's really interesting. Let's put you on a financial software that
We heard cloud, so dynamic.
We heard
Yeah.
cloud. They heard their thing. You know what? I hate you already. This technology is in your genes, your genetic makeup, man. You had all the right stuff. I am so jealous right now that I'll be 54 this year. So I still came in a great time of the wave of the bubble and the internet bubble, but I'm envious of the individuals who are either, not career changers as such, but those who are born into the technology or who are getting into it. I mentor quite a few young men and women, and one of them was a young man that graduated from the University of Arizona. Brilliant, taught himself AI, ML, data scientist, intern at large coffee maker, intern at a large chip maker, and Microsoft picked him up. He starts in June, and he wanted me to negotiate his onboarding. I looked at his signing bonus like, I'm in the wrong business. What? But I see that he loves the technology. So this is all young folks. I say young folks, you can tell I'm in Georgia, I'm in the country, right? They this is I'm excited for folks who embrace this technology. And I'm also bowed by it, right? I feared that I would be antiquated, but I came up sort of like you. I started off loving stuff, taught myself basic on a Mac. Really never got into coding. I've done everything except for actually code and do a DBA. Cisco, Stream, HP, claim to fame. I turned the entire BellSouth AT&T network over from 3Com to Cisco, right? Trial by fire, right? Sleeping like 1 hour a day. And so I came through the networking range, you name it, all the way up to CCIE, and then started doing some of these other things. And then I really got into cybersecurity about 10 years ago, 10, 12 years ago. But I've always been a Microsoft fan guy, right? I've only worked at partners. So I'm impressed by your skill set and something that I cover and that I have a passion for, which is Azure Sentinel. And I had no exposure to KQL short of about a year ago, when a guy at Microsoft named Mike Casas told me this is the thing, because I was an MCAS guy.
Yep.
So I'm gonna start off this, and I'm gonna hand the floor over to you, because I know that when we have guests on, we ask you to talk about something that you really like, what you're working on, what you believe is a game changer within Sentinel. So I'm gonna ask you a question. I'm gonna give you 4 products, and I want you, and you tell me which is your top 4, right, from 1 to 4. And you don't have to give me why. Number 1, Microsoft Cloud App Security. Number 2, Azure Sentinel. Number 3, Microsoft Defender for Endpoint. And number 4, whatever you think that I didn't name. So give me your one, and then give me the last one.
So I was watching the episode with Chris
Ah,
leading up to this, so I was ready for this one. Which how can you make me follow up both Chris and Matt Egan? You know, you trying to make me look bad. But so MCAS and MDE, and then what were the other two? You said one that you didn't name.
Sentinel, and then you get to choose a fourth. You get to choose a dark horse to come in.
Okay. I mean, this is non-biased. This is strictly from a thought perspective. But Azure Sentinel's got to be number one.
All right, because there's a lot of PG people if you're watching, you're right.
Yeah.
So
Well,
I
I mean,
said,
like I said, it's not biased, but in a sense, you take all of these security products that Microsoft have, all these great products. Azure Sentinel is just those products because it just benefits from the data and does the same detections. So, I can say MDE is number one, but Azure Sentinel is also the same thing as MDE and can be number one. So, but if I had to talk strictly, to your question for Chris, which was, what do I deploy first? I'm going to go with MDE. Reason for that being is, MDE covers a little bit about accounts, but you should know what your machines are doing. So MDE is going to catch the suspicious behaviors, the malicious behaviors, malicious files, any type of malicious connections that are going on, and alert you to that. Because, and here's why I'm prioritizing machines over identity, in that when an identity is compromised, you can just snip it at the bud. Revoke access, revoke tokens, change password. But when a machine gets compromised, that's a whole rabbit hole of just a dumpster fire. And when I say dumpster fire, it's one of my key terms right here.
dumpster fire.
Dumpster fire. So, when the machine gets compromised, it's a dumpster fire. This whole Exchange server issue going on right now, our favorite topic, it's not that we're compromising identities. We're getting machines that are getting compromised and stealing emails. So if you got, Exchange servers with MDE, you'll find out. And that gets into number two, which is what I would say is Defender for Office. Because, Defender for Office, you're covering what? Teams, SharePoint, Exchange, Outlook, DLP, data classification. Like that's it's gigantuan of just coverage for your apps that are essential to your everyday business needs. From there,
I agree with you. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So for the last two, that's tough. In that, I can see you're frowning right now because you're upset I didn't pick MCAS.
I got to buy Frank more Chick-fil-A fries now.
So the toss-up for the last two is between Defender for Identity and MCAS. The reason for that being is, especially nowadays where we got the integration between the two, you can prioritize one over the other, but you got overlap. Mm-hmm. I think MDI is great, seeing that, you put it on a DC, it learns all the identities, all, your forests, your trees and such, and alerts you to malicious account behavior. But MCAS benefits from that, and MCAS has overlap with that, and also tracking that information. So I can't pick for the last two.
And that's a great. I mean that was, we're going to ask this of everybody else. I think Chris B is coming up next week. Right?
Oh, that's going to be a good one.
Yeah, and I like what you're talking about, because I see that now. MCAS is noisy, and the reason that I choose MCAS, I have an affection for. When I came on the partner side, a guy named Jared Poppelman took me up on his wing. I know all the things about MCAS, the PowerShell modules, and then Mike Casas came on, and I had a huge relationship with that product group over there, and so. That was the first thing I sort of became an expert at. Really good, right? But I go with you. I can see that MCAS has its place, and it's a great product, right? It can be noisy, right? I like MDI because it's so simplistic and is really dedicated to the job that it does. And I don't want it to do anything. I don't ever hear anything from it, Because if you hear something from it, you got a problem.
Mm-hmm.
You really got a problem. I don't want any alerts coming out of MDI, right? I can deal with impossible travel and suspicious logins, but when I start seeing these lateral movement stuff, right, and these type of attacks, I'm like, and then I hope that none of our customers with Exchange MDI environments are lighting up right now, right? You made a good point, then we'll get into your topic here. The machine, you're right. You can easily remediate an identity because it's transit, it's synthetic, and it's tied to an access process. But when your machines are compromised, can you no longer trust them? Right?
Right.
And it's not financial and fiscally possible for a lot of places. I've seen it done now at a cost of tens of millions of dollars. You got to blast the network.
Yep.
You can't trust that machine. SolarWinds has taught us this, right? And so when you have this machine, customers say, "Well, Ed, you smoking meth and crack with a little bit of weed on it if you think we're going to blast our total environment, right? So give me an alternative." So the alternative is you got to go to a zero trust model. Everybody's an adversary. Nobody can be trusted anymore. Identities are machine and everybody's suspect. And that's the only way you're going to be able to maintain the capital investment of an infrastructure you put in place. Otherwise, you got to zero it out. And if it's a crime scene, which hacks are, a lot of people don't realize that, that's a crime scene. If you report it, you got to, this is evidence. You got to take that switch out, that router out, the desktop out, that server, whether it's virtualized on premise or in the cloud, you cannot trust it anymore. So if you can't do that, you got to go to a zero trust, which is why I'm a huge fan of Somos, who writes the architectures and the zero trust models, right? I sort of like that. Nathan, you got any questions for Matt? I know you guys talk all the time. Before we let him get into his into the thing that he is an expert in.
No, I mean, I don't think I have any technical questions or anything like that. I love how you brought up the latest thing with Exchange. You know, I was on Twitter over the weekend just looking at different Twitter feeds and stuff. And funny guy was posting about, hey, you know, everyone's dusting off the Exchange books, you know, installing Exchange 2008. Getting that up in a virtual environment, putting it out there as like a honeypot just to start collecting information. And it was just funny because it's like, you know, as a former Exchange admin myself, it's like, oh yeah, you know, people still run Exchange on premise. You know, maybe hopefully because there's public folders or something like that, but sometimes they do still have that stuff exposed to the public endpoints, right? Maybe they're still finishing up some mailbox migrations or, you know, just using it for maybe offline address books still somehow. They're not using it from Exchange Online. So
SMTP relays and fax servers.
Yeah, maybe they're still using it MTA transport. So yeah, it's just fascinating that came up because as a former Exchange admin, I was like, oh yeah, you know, I haven't thought about this since I moved my company to Exchange Online about 6-7 years ago, right? And we finished and deprecated the hybrid Exchange on-premise servers. So it's just kind of fascinating topics just kind of coming up around that. And like I said, just funny tweet, just seeing someone talk about, oh man, I had to dust off the Exchange knowledge and start looking at the different stacks within Exchange.
I wish there was a way to capture the impact of this latest zero or day one exploit, because if you ask a lot of Exchange admins, and I've reached out to some of my peers there in the field, Exchange is one of those things like, man, if it ain't broke, don't on premise, don't touch it. And they'll tell you, man, I haven't installed a CU in so long, right? So now they're going back and install these CUs, and unfortunately, you know, one of my a lot of peers, they call me like, yo, what do we need to do? You know, here are the IOCs. Here's the blog, here's the tech community, here are the things you need to do. But let me tell you something that I also noticed. A lot of customers that had no interest in Sentinel say, this is low-hanging fruit. You guys have this built in and you got workbooks and all these other things to do it. They deploy Sentinel just like that. And they did it really quick. And they you know, they're like, this is not a indictment that we're going to replace our SIMs, but these SIMs are lacking. And yes, the fault is within a Microsoft product. So who better to find this stuff than the person that made it? Oh man, I'm starting to see Sentinel things come up and people are telling me we're going to run two SIMs. Azure is our cloud SIM, Sentinels.Cloud SIEM, we're going to have this one, and we'll make the determination down the road about which way we pivot. But I'm seeing Sentinel adoption absolutely take off right now. Even in SMBs and SMCs, you can get the Sentinel up and running and have useful telemetry, actionable intelligence, actionable insights in an hour, right? And that's just the native connectors. Well, I say native connectors, but the Microsoft Central connectors, those who take the time to go in and start implementing some of the name connectors that are really nothing more than, Ceph connectors or either syslog in, right? And they're starting to do this stuff, right? So sometimes the fire makes you value water more, right? And so what I'm seeing that now, I hate to see adoption by virtue of a bad thing, but you got sometimes that's how it is, right? So I give you this, and then I'll let Matt go ahead and talk about his passion. The number one driver of technology innovation, initiatives, adoption of technologies in 2020 was the pandemic, not a CTO. The pandemic that drove what was going to be adopted and be done, right? So
now you have to operate in that new reality.
Yeah. That's it. So Matt, tell me, let's go ahead and get into your topic. You were talking about, Sentinel solutioning and architecture, and I'm going to hold the floor, and I'm definitely going to learn because, like I said, you probably forgot more about the product than I know, and I'm a big fan. Like my mentor said, good artists create and great artists steal. So I'm taking notes from Matt, right? I want to see what he's doing, right? He's like, you know what? I wrote that query, but the comment said Matthew Lowe. Oh, that's just a name for a product. Go ahead, Matt. Tell me what's going on, sir.
Yeah, you can put Matthew Lowe and just be like, oh, that's, the celebrity Rob Lowe's son, which my dad's name is Rob Lowe, but not that Rob Lowe. So I always joke that he stole from our family. But I mean, in terms of passions, I got into technology because it's ever changing. For my age group, I'm gonna, I don't mean to make you guys feel old, but I'm only 26, and for my age group, when we grew up. What did we see? We saw TVs going from color from black and white to color. We saw the adoption of the home computer, the launch and popularity of the internet with the website boom. Now we've got streaming everywhere, and cloud is now a thing. And so, I've seen firsthand how technology in a span of 20 years can evolve. And, we're kind of leveling out a little bit, but I feel like we're right around the corner from our next big thing. I think it's going to obviously be AI and, machine learning and everything there. But, my passion and what drives me to learn technology and study this stuff is just how much it's changing. There's always something new and something always exciting. And when I was interviewing with Microsoft, one of the quotes and analogies I would bring up was, you go to work as a woodworker, all the wood's not changing. Is that fulfilling? Is that enjoyable? Versus what we do today, which is it's an ever-changing landscape. 2 years ago, Azure Sentinel didn't exist. Here we are now with a new Cloud SIEM product, changing the landscape in the direction of the market because, now other competitors have to be like, well, we got to put it in the cloud. So, learning all this stuff is exciting. This is what makes going to work exciting. If it was the same crap every single day, and it's going to sound bad, but my days in support, it was the same crap every single day, and that's what drove me away from it. So to be in a role now that's aligned with a product group where I can constantly learn the technology that makes our products tick is what keeps me going. And I think, in the next couple of years, what's going to become interesting is space technology. We announced Azure Space, as absurd as it sounds, but now it becomes, well, how do we service Azure in space? How do we secure Azure in space? How are the networks going to work? So on and so forth. So, I think that's going to be the next exciting chapter especially for Microsoft.
And I agree because I forget, I heard on another podcast, they were talking about satellite internet connectivity that you can sign up for those rural areas. I think I was on the cloud Microsoft Cloud Show podcast. I love those guys, AJ and those guys. You're right. So you're I love big thinking, right? Next thing I'm thinking that they're gonna put Azure Stack, you know, matter of fact, I think I heard that they're gonna send an Azure Stack module up into space to see how it operates in
Yeah.
in outside of our atmosphere and our gravity influence into that. Because you got to think about that. If you're going to send something out that will exist after your death, right? And it is going to be, I think some people forget as we get older the immenseness of our universe, right? So they were talking about one of the satellites that's still doing the deep space technology communication thing. They're still talking back, right? That is billions of miles away. So being able to take technology and make it part of the forward thinking outside of just what my job is, that's great, man. And I love that type of big thought, big thinking, right? We're seeing it close to home too, right? Because the pandemic is driving innovation within, RNA, virology, and all these other things, right? So what better way? I came from the military and I worked in nuclear weapons. So you can't just go around detonating nuclear weapons to see the effect. You had to simulate what the effect was with these advanced data models. And it was difficult back then. You had a room full of computers. Hell, you can do it now in the cloud. Simulate what a 100 megaton blast is going to look like, right?
Yep.
So within Sentinel, I do it. I support it. What is the thing in Sentinel? And you touch a lot of things, right? What's the thing that if you had to tell the customer or you had to close the deal that you would say, you really need to check this out in Sentinel?
That's a tough question. And the reason why that's tough for me is because I'm a believer that the best feature that Sentinel has is its flexibility and evolution. And that's not really something that you can show off as a one-off in a sales call. I can't dig up how Sentinel looked a year ago. I think moving forward, it's definitely going to be what we offer via machine learning. It's not quite where it can be, but in the future, I think once we build up our machine learning model, allowing customers to bring their own machine learning, that's going to be the selling point. Saying your SOC would take on average 3 hours to triage this. Machine learning just did it in 20. Machine learning did it for you before the incident even triggered.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the benefit of Azure Sentinel being in cloud, is that we can have Microsoft machine learning in the back end at no cost, just ticking away constantly, doing the work for them. And it's only going to get better.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're right. I am amazed that the advancement in technologies that seem science fictionist seems very credible now. Because I was looking for something and I bumped into a buddy and he was at Microsoft. I said, "What are you doing here?" He said, "I'm a coder, man." I said, "What are you programming?" Q Sharp. What's Q Sharp? I'm working on quantum computers. Really? Is that right? So me in my mind goes, "Can you help me predict the lottery numbers?" And he's like, "No, it doesn't work that way, Ed." I'm like, "Oh, okay. I just thought I asked." So something I wanted to ask you that I had on my piece of paper right here. Within Azure Sentinel, what's your thoughts around watch lists?
I think it's untapped potential. And I don't know if you're asking me this because I just wrote a blog article about it, or if that's the go-to gotcha question here. But I think
it's one of the things that Franklin, my co-host, he goes, watch list, right?
Right. I was sorry to chime in. I was like, Frank, I'm filling in for Frank, so I could maybe play that role. Watch list,
Tell me about it.
No, I like I said, I literally posted a blog, I think earlier this week or late last week, about using watch lists more. I think, I've definitely had customers ask for watch lists or a feature like watch lists. And the great part about watch lists is that it's not just a one-trick pony. It's not just a list of information. the great part about it is that you are in control of what's going to be in that list. That list can contain things that are within your logs, things that are from outside of your logs. A great example of this is saying, we're going to upload a watch list to Azure Sentinel that contains our office sites and the IP ranges that are associated with those office sites. Now I could take that watch list and go into threat hunting within Azure Sentinel, or set detections saying, are any IPs in my logs showing up that are outside of my IP ranges for my office sites? So that's one option. Another option is, and in my blog I talk about this, say you're investigating an incident and you're finding indicators of a compromise, and you're like, I got to keep track of these. I want to see where all of these are showing up. You pop those into a watch list, upload it to Sentinel, and now run a query in Azure Sentinel using the watch list saying, hey, where are these IOCs appearing in all of my logs? So, it's super flexible. It's really great. And, to get back on your comment about working from home insider threat, the guy who had his laptop trigger some security alerts when his kid was using it for school, and I talked about it in one of your past podcasts. If in a similar model, if we added, say, a list of employees who recently were terminated, and we're saying, keep an eye on these employees, this is insider threat, make sure they're not doing anything sketchy, deleting anything, access anything they shouldn't have. Now we've got a list. We're constantly checking for, are these people doing anything that could be damaging to the company? There's your value for watch list. And when you're done, you can just delete it. The logs are gone once it's deleted too. So Azure Sentinel retains for 90 days, but if you delete a watch list, it's gone. No 90 days retained.
Cool. Yeah, I see value in it. Because Defender for Endpoint has something similar. They call it, and I think the whole thing should be named HVT, like high value targets, right? Or HVA, high value assets, right? Because that target could be any one of the entities you could put in, URL, hash, IP, things like that, right? I see benefit in it. I don't know if it's proactive or reactive, right? I think it could be both, right? If I want to put in a high value target list, a high value asset, because I want to be proactive in the hunting perspective, it also spans the other side where I can look at it and say I'm reactive based on the behavior that is abnormal for this particular HVT, HVA, right? I've seen some customers implement it, and I've seen customers get value out of it, right? It sort of mirrors what you're doing. I wish you could do it in MCAS, where you can, and I think you can actually go ahead and write specific policies, because I'm trying to overcome a impossible travel noise metric. And I'm saying, don't go by that alert by itself. Let's combine this with a few other things: multiple login failures, MFA failures, known login from infrequent locations, and then add in another set of rule sets like anonymous IP. Why are you using Tor? So don't just go by one alert. Add all the alerts and be able to do it. And Sentinel does that in the background, because I'm assuming it's doing some type of AI ML to say, if this is a HVA, I'm applying some conditions on the back that says this HVA meets the criteria to set off an alert with enough high water marks to set off an incident. So I'm a fan of it. I like it. We need a more sexy name for it. Watch list. So yeah.
What they were going for with that was just like a nice neutral name. Instead of doing like whitelist, blacklist, they were just like watch list.
I got a trivia question for you then.
Oh boy.
We're going by names. Azure Sentinel, was it the first SIEM to have the name of moniker Sentinel?
No.
You got it right. And for the bonus points, which includes a trip to Hawaii, who was the vendor that had a SIEM that was called Sentinel?
I don't know.
It was NetIQ/Novell. Novell had a SIEM called Sentinel. You can look it up. To our listeners that are going to fact check me and say, Ed, you don't know your ass from a hole in the ground, go look it up. Someone sent me some, and it was a Novell/NetIQ had a SIM called Sentinel. I did not know that until this week.
See, now if I had known it was going to be Novell, I would have phoned my dad because he's done work with Novell before. So he might have known that. He could have saved me.
I didn't know that because I used to work with Novell, so I was used to their firewall or edge security called Border Manager from back in the day, right? I was a CNE, CNA, and 4.1 was the last time I sort of touched it, right? Great operating system. Piss poor marketing on the company, right? and caused that company to sort of go the way of BlackBerry and a few others, right? Solid technologies, right? So what are you currently working on that has you, that you can talk about, that has you challenged, that's making you like, man, I got to figure this out? What are you working on right now?
I mean, outside of the products, I'm working on official documentation for Azure Sentinel best practices for our customers. It's probably the most highly requested non-feature related item. So I've literally got like 20 plus pages of best practices that I'm trying to author. So that's going to be coming out to documentation. Outside of that, I am currently trying to revamp how we do our investigation graph. And why that is within my team, we've got engineers who are aligned with what they're interested in or what they're good at. And not complaining, I kind of got aligned with the investigation graph within Azure Sentinel, which, if you don't know, for those watching, it's probably one of the most least used features within Azure Sentinel. And so my task and my goal is to make it a feature that people will use consistently when doing incident investigations. And so currently I'm working on some ideas to potentially drive consumption, drive usage, make some people think, hey, it's a cool feature, I should probably use it. So keep an eye out if we do any changes, no ETAs on when that might be.
What are the number one requests I was asked in the field like 2 years ago when shown the investigation graph was like, hey, can I get a blast radius, in addition with a topology view of like the Azure network or the network that, we're kind of monitoring. And so that was one of the things that I've kind of heard feedback from customers, like blast radius. And, it'd be kind of interesting to even think about blast radius beyond that, and just like from an identity perspective, right? From Azure Active Directory to any other on-prem directories that you have.
Yeah, the biggest thing we have right now is a lot of customers like, the graph's really cool, what do I do with it? Or the graph's really cool, it doesn't have everything I need, because they end up just leaving the graph to go to something else. And so I'm trying to address that with some improvements.
One other thing too, I've heard too from people that were looking at the graph was like, if I could just get a nice little download button and export that to a PDF, the different things that were touched, the entities, the different service incidents that were involved with that. There's my part of my SOC write-up report, right? It's right there. So I know that was another feature people were asking for, was like an export or download button from that.
Ironically, there is a print content button in Azure. It used to be more visible, but now it's hidden. You can print a PDF.
I'm going to look at the APIs again and just take a look at that. That's interesting.
Yeah, and I'll show that when I share my screen. I'll actually just do the quick print to PDF, because that gets back to reporting. I would say reporting is probably the number 2 most asked feature or content from Sentinel, in that these SOC managers and upper management, they want reports, and we're like, well, we've got workbooks, and they're like, we want it printed. And so we kind of just go, well, make a PDF. That's all we can really offer right now. So.
Yeah, very interesting. One other thing too, and this might take us a little off course, but I'm kind of curious. Ignite was just, I think, last week. And so, another thing, as I'm filling in for Frank here today, Frank would always talk a little bit about like, okay, we've got this Azure Sentinel portal, and I've got this Microsoft Defender endpoint, or not Defender endpoint, but Microsoft 365 portal and Defender portal, and these portals. I think there was some announcement around Ignite around some integration between the investigation, and then the incidents potentially being synchronized in some fashion. Can you talk a little bit about what was announced? And
Yeah, absolutely. So to give context in the past, as Nate was mentioning, Microsoft, for whatever reason, has an affinity for having countless portals for their security products. And so Azure Sentinel is meant to serve as that one central location where everything's going to be located. But we did not have a synchronization between Sentinel and these other non-Azure related platforms. So last week at Ignite, we've got documentation out there, a blog out there, and we have a new integration that's in public preview, not fully released, but public preview, that will allow for incident integration syncing between the two platforms, being Azure Sentinel and Microsoft 365 Defender. And so what that means is when you update an incident, whether it's a status, an assignment, a comment, anything like that, it's going to be synced between Sentinel and M365 Defender. So gone are the days of having to update in one, going to the other and updating in the other. Now it's going to be automatic. And what's great about that is that's also going to have like a ripple effect when you close the incident in Azure Sentinel, and then it updates and closes the incident in M365 Defender. M365 Defender is now going to go out and close all the related incidents from the providers. So it's monumental for customers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, and I think that consolidation of effort and activity is a huge thing, right? You want to prevent or minimize as much of this between your operators and your SOC. And one thing I'm happy that Microsoft is doing. At first, they were just so concerned that feature richness was a big thing, but now they're looking at productivity and effectiveness, and they're sort of fixating on the SOC, right? SOC people get burned out, right? And one of the biggest security risks to any organization is SOC people that are really good are in demand, and you could have a knowledge drain if someone steals your guy. So one thing I like about Azure Sentinel is it's one of the products that has a huge amount of recyclable skill set. You can take a security guy from Collaboration 365. You can take an endpoint guy and make him a Sentinel guy. You can take a data guy, especially if he's well versed in Azure monitoring and has KQL skills, man, and turn him into something, right? So it's not a silo technology, and I like the ecosystem. It is a weakness sometimes because we tend to fixate on the SKU sale, but when you look at the overall rubber to the road and the lead time to be able to be effectively and show return on investment to the powers that be and the bean counters, Sentinel's the way to go, right? Being able to turn it on, and I'm reluctant to go talk about the free ingestion, right? Nothing's ever free. I like to say zero cost. But when you can eliminate 80% of the physical infrastructure requirements and still get the useful intelligence, oh my God, how does this not make sense, right? How many other places can run a POC and never tell you to buy a single piece of equipment if you don't want to?
Right. And then, if you run your POC in 30 days, well, guess what? Now you don't have any charge.
No charge.
So you just clean it up.
And so if within Sentinel, I know that you're product group manager. Are you you're in CXC. Do you have a focus on any particular feature or functionality? I am a huge fan of the entity behavior and analytics, as well as analytic rules. Are those within your realm of responsibility to look at and work with engineering?
Unfortunately, no. That's the exciting stuff. I don't know. You might have stepped away when Nate and I were talking about it. I'm aligned with Investigation Graph and Investigation.
Oh, okay.
Sentinel.
I'm sorry. Yeah, AT&T was out front digging up my damn yard. Right. I'm like, don't do that, dude.
Yeah. Luckily, they didn't cut the cable. We've had that happen before.
I'm in new construction because they're building new houses, and this has happened before, and I had to run away. So I went outside and yelled at them because they were about to do it. Right. Well, we're putting in this top box, or whatever they call it, put your fiber in. Not now, you aren't.
Yep. So what I was saying before when you stepped out is I'm aligned with Investigation Graph, which we were joking, if you know anything about Azure Sentinel, Azure Investigation Graph's probably tied for the least used feature within the product. So Nate was asking, if I got anything cool upcoming for that, or what am I working on to improve that feature, which I just talked about. My goal for that feature is to drive consumption, increase interest in it, because right now it's kind of like everyone's like, it's really cool. It doesn't have what I need, or it's not enough value for me to use it consistently.
I'm a fan of it because short of the entity behaviors, I use it to close the deal, especially when you can drag around and be able to do it. And the biggest thing, let me tell you what I would like to see in the product though. You have a bunch of undo, but I would love to see a button that takes it back to where before I start expanding out the circles and timeline to put it back to square one. Like, because I can undo all my way back, but I'd like to have a button right next to it that say set 0.
Right, like a reset.
Reset. What was I when I got started? Right. That's probably only really the shortcoming that I see, because it's rendering pretty well. But when I get a super complex lateral chain or domain domination thing, and I got all these bubbles, I'm moving stuff and I can't quite remember. And I don't want to undo all the way back to the end. I'd rather just say, let me start over and hit that, and it puts it back to, net 0, and then I can start the investigation again. Something else is a little flaky with it. When you look at the actual investigation bubbles and you hover over it and it gives you the individual events related to it, sometimes it renders, sometimes it don't. It may be my lab. I think it's my lab. But it used to fire up at the bottom, and it would open up a series of the column representation and manifestation at the very bottom of the portal, that I could look at the individual events at the bottom. It may be that my lab is not in PP, private preview. I'll talk to Christina about that and see what's going on with it.
Actually, I can answer that.
Okay.
Yeah, so that feature, it was in preview, but it got pulled because it's going to get added to something else in the future. So they were just kind of like, it's at a point where we can, have customers give us feedback on it, but then they kind of pulled it back because they were like, we've got other plans for this. It's going to change because, you were using it. Customers were like, we want logs on this graph. So, it was addressing some needs, but for whatever reason, they've got some other plans.
Okay. I didn't know that. Like I said, I have an independent lab that I use, and I'm in the PPs and stuff, and I was looking at it. And I'm like, I broke something. Either one of the flags are wrong, and I'm doing something wrong right here. But very cool to know. We have 7 minutes in the show left. Tell me what you're excited about, or what you wish Sentinel would do, or what's the number one ask from your customers, right? So either what you're excited about that's coming, what you wish it would do, or this is a top ask from a customer. And if we can get this in here, this is going to lower the learning curve or whatever it may be. It'll make the adoption of Sentinel better. Just either one of those three. You don't have to be one of each. You can just be one.
Trying to think of what's upcoming, what I might be excited about,
and what you can talk about. We don't talk about NDA stuff on here,
yeah,
because I don't want to go back and have to cut and edit, right? Or Frank doesn't want to go back and cut and edit.
NDAs today.
Yeah, they're NDA, right?
That's a tough one. I'll say one thing I wish the product does or did in this case, and this is something that I've brought up as a idea, a proposition, and that Sentinel needs to do a better job of kind of guiding people where to go during an investigation. Because right now, what I've heard from customers most is they're like, I get an incident, I go to investigate it, I go in the graph, I don't know what to do. And so one of my goals, in improving the graph is also to kind of guide people along, because, right now in the current state of the product, we've got 3 statuses: new, active, closed. We need to, get it to a point where we're like, you are in this phase of the incident investigation process. You're in preparation, or you're in detection, or you're in remediation, post-incident processes, anything like that, somewhere to give them an idea of, okay, well, I'm a small SOC, I don't know what to do. Oh, these statuses from Microsoft say I should do preparation, remediation, containment, post compromise processes. Like that's the flow I should do. That's what we should strive for. So I'm trying to get the feature, the product to kind of drive that instead of customers being like, well, I don't know what to do. I'm just going to go back to my other investigation tool outside of Sentinel.
Great point. How about I make a suggestion?
Give it to me. I'm already taking notes. So
how about wherever I am in the investigation, I can save it. So if I need to get up and go walk somewhere, if I close that screen on my browser refresh, I come back and all my bubbles are in a different spot. Like, where was I? Right? So be able to, even if it's in progress, to click save current progress wherever I am and save that screenshot so that when I log back on, if I took the bubbles and moved the IP entities over here, the host entities over here, the URL over here, the hash here, and I do something dumb like close my browser, but I did save it, I can open it back up. It'll bring me right back to the exact same spot. That would be super helpful because I do love it being browser-based interaction that I can just grab the little bar at the end and drag back over and like, what did I start? Oh, I was in analytic rule and I took a custom analytic rule and an analytic rule template and now I'm making it into a custom rule. But sometimes if I pivot, especially if I'm labbing out, I'll forget. But if there was a way to save it, to say save investigation status. And that way, when you come on, you can say, hey man, where were you at when you were working, when you went off shift? Oh, let me share my status. This is where I was right there. Right. It doesn't have to be super, to me, I'm oversimplifying it, but it may be coming. But if that's a good thing to do. And the other thing would be, I don't think you got an easy task, man, with trying to recommend what the next steps are. I know they do it in Defender for Endpoint, but not directly. They do it by saying this particular activity maps to the MITRE framework here and this TTP. And it gives you the TTP number, like 1050 process injection, so on, so. That can give you insight about what I should do next. I don't think we need to get that level, but if I can just save what I was doing, and so I can do shift handoff, right?
Exactly.
Hey man, I'm going off shift, man, and this is where I was, right? Because correct me if I'm wrong, Sentinel doesn't have a direct or definitive IR capability. I've seen customers get creative and they're using logic apps to dump collateral and incidents into teams and making teams their IR repository, but we really don't have Sentinel doesn't have an IR dedicated function. You can do it. You can create a ServiceNow ticket. You can open Slack, Teams. I've seen someone open a Zoom meeting with it. Pretty cool, right? With a logic app. I use a logic app to kick off a Power Automate, right? Response to something, but that would be great to see that in there.
Yeah, and I've had conversations with customers, and that's something I'm working on. One of the newer features that was announced at Ignite is automation rules that can kind of help with that. So, you can do something like whenever a new incident's generated, assign it to my SOC team or this specific SOC engineer if it's got a certain title. And I've set up playbooks for sending an email to the person who gets assigned, because unfortunately Sentinel doesn't have that built in at the moment. But via logic apps, you can send notifications. Via API, you can upload comments to incidents. So it might not be built in, but there's definitely IR functionality within Sentinel that could be capitalized on. But the challenge there is that, when we were designing Sentinel, we were not designing it to be an IR kind of management product in comparison to like ServiceNow. That's why we've got integrations with Jira and ServiceNow, and that we don't want to try to overtake them. We're going to empower the platform. If customers are using it, great. We're going to maximize on that.
I agree with you. I'm being greedy, because you don't want to burden down the benefits of the platform by injecting it with just more stuff. Let it do what it does, right? And Logic Apps, once you get into it and you can understand, if you know Flow, Power Automate, Logic Apps is an easy, the learning curve flattens. It even helped flatten the understanding of Azure functions for me, right? Because sometimes I think one of the things I think we need to get on the podcast is what still sometimes baffles me is the nuances and the complexity of using notebooks, right?
Oh yeah.
Oh my God. So I've had to get out the Linux books. I got the Python books out, man. I'm reading here. I'm looking at Juniper and I'm like, what am I doing?
You could even use PowerShell in the books too now. They support
there you go. So I saw the reverse engineering. I taken a look at it. It's like, okay, if I can back my way out, the way I learned workbooks was just look at it, take it and break it down into a JSON and say, okay, what's this thing doing? Then I look at a KQL and I say, right now, I just reverse engineer it. But man, great. This has been super informative. Anytime, Matthew, if you want to come on the show, talk about anything, get it out outside of the normal means of the tech community, the webinars and everything else, feel free to come on the show. We get some great comments from our listeners and supporters. I'm actually getting some texts in the background about, hey, great show. Who is this dude? Does he like Microsoft? Does he want to be? We're hiring. No, he's shaking his head. He's not going anywhere.
I
right?
just got on this team a year ago. I'm pretty happy with it right now.
Yeah,
so.
he's not going anywhere, right? And so we're going to start a table here on the Microsoft Security Insights. I'd like to invite you to be part of the table. It's sort of like our version of the Justice League, the Avengers, but we're going to be the bad guys. We're going to call ourselves the Legion of Whom. Because every time somebody asks me a question, I go, We're going to be the Legion of Whom. I'm going to be the MCAS guy. There you go. All right, we'll do it. Somebody said, what does the GOAT stand for? Greatest of all time? Nah, I'm the God of all technology. There you go. That's what GOAT is. So real vainglorious here, right? Look at Matt like, wow, this dude right here. Hey,
you're talking about Legion of that's what I'm about.
I just made up something. Somebody's giving me mess. Mr. Lowe, thank you for taking time out. I know you're super busy. I see the work that you do. I know some of the things you do we can't talk about. And I'm a fan. I'm learning. Nathan, once again, thank you for coming on and co-host. Franklin had to take care of some family matters, but hopefully he'll be back. If not, I asked that Nathan come back next week to co-host. Thank you. Great job. We're going to have the infamous Chris, and I keep saying his last name, Bohm. Is it Beam?
I've heard Bame.
Beam.
We just call him Chris B or Crispy for short.
Crispy.
Yeah,
Crispy is good. Yeah. So we're going to have Crispy on next week. I think he sent over what he wanted to talk about, and I'm learning so much, man. It's the perspective, right?
You want to talk about someone who knows it all, anything Azure, it's going to be him. So you're in for a lot of knowledge next week.
Oh no, man, because Rod Trent was talking cache. Rod was like, I'm bad. I can write KQL queries in Python. It's like, is that right? I'm just kidding. I know Rod's probably
I want to know what Rod Trent's schedule is, because it seems like the man is either giving seminars or he's writing blogs, and I want to get on that.
He's a bot.
You got to know his background to understand why he's such a prolific blogger. If you don't know, right? The dude is awesome, right? I watch his stuff and I listen to his stuff, right? I got to get better. I don't do as much as I should. And I was on the partner side. I ran the actual partner community and all the blogging there. And I moved over here, man. I've gotten lazy, right? So I got to get better. Well, gentlemen, it's 7:05. Matthew Lowe, as always, you're welcome to the show anytime, sir. Keep the great work. I'm loving what you're doing. Like I said, Nathan, I may need you next week, man, to come on and help out, man. I really appreciate you co-hosting. I couldn't have done it without you. I've been running stuff, and I couldn't have jumped off and run down there and yell at AT&T like, get out of my yard. I'm an old man, right? Get out of my yard. Get off my grass. Everyone have a good night. Be safe, and make the world a better place. Are we more secure today than we were an hour ago? I think we are.